Okay, how is everyone doing? I welcome you again to Finance 1050, Personal Finance. I hope everyone's doing well as we enjoy better spring weather and hopefully move closer to a conclusion of some of the challenges that we're going through. Let's review kind of where we're at and where we're going. It's kind of my modus operandi. We have this week's lecture tonight. Next week will be the last one. The following week, then, the week of May the 4th, the first week of May, I will email to Angie and she'll email to you the second exam. Now, we'll talk more about the second exam next week, but I can tell you it's going to be just like the first exam. It is not comprehensive. It'll cover what we've gone over since the first exam. There'll be about 20 true false, 25 or 30 multiple choice, and probably 6 to 8 short essay. Short essay will be 2 to a page. It will be there will be some questions on the Susie Orman presentation, and I'm going to talk about that next week. So you'll need to take notes, just like on the first exam when we had 4 or 5 questions on the Dave Ramsey presentation. It will be closed book. So in this time, I just put everyone on their honor that once you are done studying your notes, the textbook, anything else, you put it away and then take the exam, and then you can email it to me. Now, I need to have the exams by that Friday, which I think will be about the 7th or 8th, because I've got to get grades in. Okay? Now, I sent an email to everybody who is lacking in assignments, and I hope all of you got it or will respond to it. Let's just review some of the assignments that are outstanding that are going to be due. There's no penalty, as I've said many times, for being late in your assignments, but all these are due by the end of the semester. Last week we did the mutual fund. Now that is just how much you might be able to put into a mutual fund when you start to do one, which will hopefully be sooner rather than later. On top of that, the larger assignments that are all due by the week of May 4th. One is, of course, the term paper. Several of you have turned that in. Another is the book report. These are both 4 or 5 pages long. You email them to me. Tell me what you thought of the book you read and the subject you chose for the term paper. There is also the investment assignment. Each week you should be checking your 10 stocks to see how they're doing. And then, of course, the ongoing assignment that we've had since the 1st of February is your personal budget, February, March, and April. And again, I don't need to see the budget per se. It's none of my business where you spend your money. And this will be, again, more or less an honor on your honor. And that is just email me and tell me you have kept the budget to the best of your ability for those 3 months. So those are all pretty big assignments, except for the mutual fund from last week, which was a 5-point assignment. Okay? This afternoon, tonight, or whenever you have the opportunity to watch this lecture on YouTube, we're going to cover Chapter 17 a little bit. There's not a lot in it. And then Chapter 18 in detail, which is retirement. So let's go a little bit into Chapter 17. Then I'll give you your 5-point assignment, which will be due this week when we start Chapter 18, probably in about 10 minutes or so. In Chapter 17, we talk about different investments besides the stock market. We've talked a lot about the stock market, the bond market, and mutual funds. There are a couple of other things that need to at least be addressed. If you turn to page 595, you'll see real estate. Now, I'm not talking about buying your own home. Your own home is certainly an investment, but it doesn't produce investment income. You pay a monthly payment, house payment, so that you have the opportunity to live in the home. The nice thing is you get a tax break, and of course, obviously, or in most cases, it'll appreciate in value over time. We're talking about investing in, say, a rental, a duplex, a home, an apartment, something like that. I've never done investing in real estate, to be honest with you. I'm not against it per se, but I do have some observations. My sister in Florida owns some real estate, I have a brother-in-law here in the Salt Lake Valley that owns some real estate also. And here's my observation on real estate. The advantages is that just like your personal home, it increases in value over time. Another advantage is that you get to take a nice depreciation write-off on your taxes that you don't get to take on your personal homeowners. The interest on the real estate that you pay, as very seldom are we going to be able to buy a duplex or a rental unit with cash. The interest is tax deductible also. So all that is positive. So there's some positive elements there. The other positive element, obviously, is that we collect rent. Now, that is both a positive and a negative because sometimes it's difficult to collect rent. A good example is right now with the COVID-19 crisis. I think I read the other day that 1/3 of all people who are renting in the United States were not able to make their rental payment in April because they lost their job or other financial difficulties that have come along because of this. So one of the real risks that you do take when you invest in property is that you may not be able to get rental income. My thought and advice would be this, that if you're really going to invest in rental income, you probably ought to have at least 4 months rent, or not rent so much as house payment, in the bank, kind of your emergency fund that Dave Ramsey talked about quite a few weeks ago, so that if somebody can't pay their rent or somebody doesn't pay their rent, you'll have a cushion there. You just never know, and probably no greater example, like I say, of that than right now with the COVID-19 crisis and people unable to pay their rent. Another downside of owning property is the upkeep. And of course, if you own the property, you're responsible for the insurance, the taxes, and the repairs. And the repairs can be significant. And sometimes, as you know, people who rent do not always take care of the property. And so that can be a difficulty too. If people just do not pay their rent, it takes a while to evict them using going through the proper authorities, and so you could go a couple months again without any rent. So again, if you're going to go into property as an investment, you need to know what you're doing. You need to build up a reserve fund, and there can be some good opportunities there. One other thing I have noticed, that a lot of people who own a little bit of property here and there and rent it out, they have a good repair person that they can depend on, or they're very handy themselves and enjoy doing that type of work, because inevitably things are going to break down. Faucets are going to start leaking. You're going to have plumbing problems. You're going to have other problems from time to time. Rooms are going to need to be repainted, recarpeted, things of this particular nature. So you need to build up a reserve for that and figure out how you're going to deal with that, because it will happen. It's inevitable. So real estate can be a good long-term investment. Another thing that we've mentioned before, if you think about the stock market and mutual funds, as I mentioned, one great advantage is they're very liquid. In other words, if you want to take money out of the stock market today or out of a mutual fund, you can have your cash in 72 hours, which is 3 working days. Obviously, that doesn't happen in real estate. If you have a property and you want to sell it, depending on the market, you'd probably be lucky to have the cash out of it in 2, maybe 2.5 months. So it's not quite as liquid. So some of the things to think about, again, if you're going to go into real estate, I would say this: it needs to be, just like we say in stocks, mutual funds, it needs to be a long-term investment. You're not in it to make a quick buck, but there can be some benefits. Now, Susie Orman, you may not recall this, might be a good test question 2 weeks from today, talked about what's known as a REIT, a real estate investment trust, on page 598. And that is basically a mutual fund that invests in real estate rather than in stocks. And actually, I have invested in a couple REITs, and it's a way to take advantage of the real estate market without having to buy the property, without having to collect the rent, and so on and so forth. REITs over time have been good. They're steady. Again, they're not a get rich quick type investment, but basically, we would probably all agree, in most cases, depends a little on the location, but property over time, real estate goes up in value. And REITs can take advantage of that. Like everything, there's risk. A good example, even throwing out the coronavirus and all that we're going through, if you think about real estate now, if you got into a REIT that invested heavily in shopping centers, we all have seen a lot of the big box stores, the Sears, J.C. Penney's. I noticed Neiman Marcus, a high-end store out of Dallas, is filing bankruptcy. So um, there is risk, and that's why if you're going to put money in a REIT, you want to make sure it's diversified, and certainly you wouldn't want to put all your money into any investment. So hence, again, the importance of diversification. But there are some great advantages, again, for real estate. On page 601, it talks about a possible hedge against inflation. It talks about generally over time, again, real estate will go up in value. The disadvantages on 602, again, it is not liquid. And there's sometimes can be a lack of diversification. That's not so much in a REIT, but that would be if you put a lot of money into an apartment or a duplex or a home. It might take quite a bit of your cash reserve and your capital. So hence, not so much of diversification. Some of the tax shelters benefits of depreciation, the interest that you get to write off, it's not immediate. You've got to wait until you file your taxes, so that can be a year to a year and a half away. And of course, there are management problems. One of the big things that mentions that even in REITs, some of them don't do good depending on their past performance. But even if you own the property yourself, again, sometimes people don't always pay the rent. Okay, it talks in the book, and I'm just going to touch on these a little bit. I don't really consider these as much investing as more, they probably ought to be hobbies, and that is investing in precious metals, gems, and collectibles. They mention gold on page 604. I heard facetiously someone say once that gold is a great long-term investment. It'll probably do great over the next 2,000 or 3,000 years. And obviously none of us are going to be around that long. Gold has been, held its value when you look at it over time for a long time period. The actual price of gold, though, does seem to go up and down. So every now and then when we go through a difficult economic time, which we're going through now, obviously the stock market's up and down and been down quite a bit. As you do your assignment and follow these 10 stocks, you can see that. But sometimes people will come out and say, buy gold, buy silver. My thoughts on that, I can still remember, I think it was in the early to mid 80s when I just started to invest. We were in a downtime in the economy, and a lot of people were. I can remember a couple people I worked with at the time, the company I worked with, the insurance company at that time, trying to get me to invest in gold and silver and things like that. So I, not per se against it. I just, it's not very liquid, and it really fluctuates quite a bit. One thing I remember my father told me before he passed away, I asked him once about gold and silver, and my dad, who was very wise, said, I just don't like them. He said, I can look at a corporation or I can talk to a stockbroker and get a feel for how well they're doing and how well they might do, how well their management team is and their market plan and business plan. Gold and silver is just totally speculative. So that's kind of my thoughts. Again, if you're going to invest in gold or silver, make sure that you're diversified. That's a small amount. It is risky. If you look on 17.3, you can see the price of gold, the fluctuation since 1976, quite a few years ago, but you can see very lackluster for a long time, then some huge increases, a lot of big increases and decreases. So, if you want to go that direction, wouldn't put too much money into it. Silver, same way. Precious stones, again, it is so hard to get a feel for how it's going to be valued. The book mentions a little bit on collectibles, works of art, stamps, rare books, things like that, baseball cards, and all of these things, they are highly speculative. To me, these should be hobbies and not investments. If you happen to have an expertise in this area and enjoy it, then maybe you could do a little bit of investing in memorabilia or collectibles in this area. But as a long-term investment of building wealth, I don't think that's the direction that generally we want to go. All I can say, if you're going to do and invest in these items and do it even a little bit more in collecting, please make sure you know what you're doing and just be cautious. Go at it one step at a time. Make sure you don't violate the element of diversification, so that if the market falls out of whatever collectible or whatever memorabilia that you may go for, that you'll be okay. Okay, let's jump into chapter 18. We're going to talk about retirement planning. I realize retirement for most of you in the room and in the class is a long ways away, but here's your 5-point assignment for this week. And I want you to send to me and think about retirement. You might look at your folks, your grandparents, other people that are retired, and just say, where, when I retire, realizing it's going to be a long time away, although time can slip by, and before you know it, you're looking at it, but where are you going to get money and income when you retire? Write down 4 or 5 sources. Obviously, we're going to go ahead and talk about most of these, but I do like on page 618 the table here that talks a little bit about starting for a secure retirement. And here are some questions that we can ask ourselves. And number 1, I can depend on Social Security and my company pension to pay for my basic living expenses. Yes, no, or uncertain. Reviewing my assets to ensure they are sufficient for retirement is a sound idea. My spending patterns during retirement will probably not change that much. And by the way, every study I've seen, that is true. Just because you retire does not mean that your spending habits will change that much. So that means when we put together a thought and a plan toward retirement, we've got to expect to want to continue to live basically at the same level that we are when we retire. The place where I live during retirement can have significant impact on my financial needs. My Social Security will be reduced if I retire before age 65. That is true. We're going to talk about Social Security in a couple minutes. To supplement my retirement income, I may want to work part-time or start a new part-time career when I retire. These are all interesting questions. Let's talk a little bit about the assignments you're going to turn in for 5 points. And the majority of people that when they do this assignment talk about a couple of sources of income. Number 1, let's talk about one that we've already brushed upon just a second ago, and that is Social Security. Now, Social Security, it's interesting. Every now and then, you'll hear kind of what I call prophets of doom, if you will, doomsayers, saying that Social Security is going bankrupt. One thing that I wished I had kept, and I think this was in the mid to late 1980s, I was going to graduate school, get my master's degree up in Logan at Utah State. And I can remember an article came out. Like I said, I wished I'd saved it. And it said Social Security will be bankrupt by the end of the century or the year 2000, which is 20 years ago. And, the economy was struggling a little then, not like it is now, but they were in the doldrums a little bit. And a lot of people kind of bought into that, which I'm glad I didn't. But let me just say a couple words about Social Security. Please don't ever buy into the argument that Social Security is going bankrupt. It isn't. Okay? When you retire, Social Security will be there. I can promise you that. Because if you think about it, where's it going to go? There are still people working. Believe me, our political will would never allow Social Security to go under. Now, that being said, as we think it through and look at Social Security, there's going to have to be some changes in Social Security for it to be funded properly. And the two elements that come in is that as time marches on, probably the age to get a full retirement at Social Security will probably go up. Right now it's age 66. And probably we're all, or those who are working, are going to have to pay more into the fund. But Social Security will be around. So don't ever buy into that. Most people who tell you that Social Security is going bankrupt are people that are trying to sell you a particular retirement plan, which quite frankly, you don't need. Okay? So don't buy into that. It's not going to happen. Social Security will be around. Now, that being said, one thing that we need to realize right now, that when we retire, we want to make sure that we have more than just Social Security, because I can promise you this, by the time you retire, whenever that may be, Social Security, just like even today, in and of itself will not be enough to fund your retirement. So Social Security is part of what I call the retirement equation. And we will take Social Security out. We've been paying into it, and that'll be fine. But we've got to have some other sources of income so that we can have a comfortable retirement. Okay? Now, let me just speak, and this isn't in the book per se, but I've done some study of retirement. I've looked in particular at my father and my father-in-law. I've looked at, I have friends of mine that are retired, and just at other people that retire. And I think there's two or three what I call key elements to retirement. I think the most important one, and we have a lot of control over this, is by the time we retire, we need to be 100% debt-free. As we need to dump debt, as Dave Ramsey said in the presentation a few weeks ago. If you think about it, if we start, our spouse, our partner, together, however our arrangement is, if we start working full-time in a career type position, roughly from age 25 to age 65, kind of the traditional retirement age, so that's more or less 40 years. Isn't that enough time for all of us to buy a home, maybe even sell it and get another home, do some improvements? But in 60 years, we should be out of debt. If we're not, it's really kind of shame on us. We have done a poor job of planning and managing our personal finances. So being out of debt is key, and especially when we buy a home, if we are going with a 10-year or 15-year mortgage, certainly not the 30-year mortgage. Remember, Dave Ramsey talked about that, so did Susie Orman. But we should be able to be out of debt, and especially if we're budgeting and we get our credit card under control, so we're not paying interest, paying cash for our consumer goods, we should be out of debt easily by the time we hit age 65. That's number one. You know, I go back, and he said this facetiously, but think what Dave Ramsey said, and there's a lot of truth in it. What can you do when you're out of debt? Anything you want to. Now, that's true within reason, but nothing will give you more flexibility in your retirement or get close to retirement being out of debt. So that's a key element. The second one, I think, the second key element, as I've looked at it, is our health. Now, how much control do we have over our health? I think we have a lot of control. We don't have total control. We've already talked in this class about number one, no smoking. Remember, we talked about that when we talked about both the health insurance and life insurance. Save you a lot of money, and obviously it's not good for you. Number two, we can probably eat better, more vegetables, less fast food. And number three all of us should start and be involved, hopefully by now, in some type of an exercise program, even if it's just walking. It's interesting with the COVID-19 and a lot of gyms closed now. I see a lot more people walking and biking, which is good. We can get involved in an exercise program without spending a lot of money. But if we're exercising, if we're eating right, if we're out of debt, we'll do fine in retirement. Now, let's talk about a couple sources of income that are just critical. Number one, Social Security. Again, we don't have to worry about that. Why? Because the money is just taken out of our paycheck. And our Social Security benefit will be calculated the age that we retire, the number of years we worked, and how much we've put into it. The earliest that we can take Social Security out is age 62. Now, everybody's circumstance is different, but Susie Orman and others that I've studied have basically said the best time to start collecting Social Security is age 70 or 71. You can max out the most, and assuming your health is there and you can wait that long financially, that is something to think about. But you worry about more about that when you get into your 50s, late 50s, and into your 60s, and start doing some quantitative analysis on your retirement. Now, the next important element, and I've talked about this since day one, and all of you that are listening to me are very fortunate because you work for a great company in Discover. They have an excellent 401k. And if I remember right, even if you don't put anything into it, which I hope is not the case, they put in 2%. But my advice, again, to everyone on the 401k is the first day you get to work, wherever you're working, Discover. Now, maybe you might end up changing your job or your spouse or partner. You get into it, the maximum amount as early as possible. You know, it's interesting. Maybe I've told this story, but my kids, I preach this all the time. And last September, each Labor Day, we go up to Yellowstone and the Jackson area and hike and bike and all the fun things that offers. And we were on a hike, I think in Jackson, if I remember right. And I was with my son-in-law and a couple of granddaughters, and we started talking about retirement. My son-in-law is a great young man, laughed and said, here comes Robert's retirement speech again." I said, "Yeah, here it comes." And he said, "Well, I'm in my 401k to the maximum amount." And I said, "Great." I said, we're making progress. So I was happy to hear that. Your 401k is critical because, first of all, that is how you're going to supplement your retirement from Social Security. And second of all, it offers you what I call free money. If you put in, depending on the company, but let's say you put in 8% of your salary, then Discover matches it with 8%. So you're putting 16% away. But guess what? If you put in 0% and postpone it, then Discover, I think, if I remember right, will put in 2% just because they do such a good job. Most companies won't. They'll match 0 for 0 and probably be happy to do it. So you've got to get involved in the 401k. As I said, we tend to build our budget around our take-home pay. So if you get involved in the 401k from day one, you'll build your budget around your take-home pay. I have seen that in my life, and everything will work out good. Now, another reason that the 401k is so critical, and I just can't emphasize this enough, is that really there has been a complete change, a revolution, if you will, in retirement. When your folks worked, and especially your grandparents were working, companies had what was known as a company-funded pension. Okay? In fact, if you look at that first question again on 618, it said, "I can depend on my Social Security and company-funded pension." Company-funded pensions, for the most part, have gone the way of the world. They have at Cincinnati Insurance, where I work, and I know because I talked to Heather Christensen about it, they no longer have a company pension at Discover. They have the 401k. The company pension was kind of like Social Security, and back in the day, your parents or grandparents Didn't have to worry about retirement. The company put the money in. They managed the money. You didn't have to contribute anything. As I said, basically, you just had to keep your nose clean, keep your keep your nose to the grindstone, do a good job, keep your job. And when you're retired, you had a monthly payout, or you'd receive a monthly pension, kind of like Social Security, depending on your age, how long you worked, and how much money you made at your given company. Well, those days are long since over. Companies, there I can't say 100%, but I'll bet 98, 99% of companies do not offer company funded pensions. They offer the 401k. And so if you jump into the 401k, they'll match it. But if you don't, not too many companies like Discover, you won't get anything. So that's why it is so critical. And if you remember Susie Orman's presentation when she talked about dollar cost averaging, it is so important not to say, well, I'll wait 4 or 5 years to get in the 401k. No, you've got to do it right away. Those early years are so critical when you think about the principle and the element of compounding that we talked about clear back in January. So the 401k is just critical. I just can't emphasize it enough. So please, if I remember right, I think all of you told me you were in the 401k. Again, I would look at it to get it into the maximum amount. You know what's interesting in the 401k? It has the principles that we learned in mutual fund. First of all, there's professional management. Your money in a 401k is managed by a third party that Discover contracts with. And then you have diversification, because in essence, what they're doing is they're putting that money into various mutual funds. Now, your 401k, just like the stock market, it'll go up and down over time. But it's a long-term investment of 25, 30, 40, 45 years. And over time, it will do fine. Even if the stock market goes down, the fact that half the money you're putting in is not yours, plus you get a tax break. The money that goes in the 401k that you contribute is taken off your adjusted gross income, so you don't have to pay any federal income tax on it. So the 401k is win-win. So again, I hope I haven't talked too much on it, but it is just critical that you get in to the 401k. Okay, if you look at on page 620, it talks about the importance of starting early. And that is why you want to just start early on the 401k. I won't go through the math, and I told you there's no math problems on these tests, but if you look at Exhibit 18-1 on 620, you can see that if you put $2,000 a year into a retirement at various ages, how much money you'll have. Compound interest. Remember, earning interest on interest. Remember, Albert Einstein said it was the most important thing he had ever discovered in his life. It is so important, and that's why you don't want to wait, like Susie Orman taught us in the presentation in her DVD. You don't want to wait for the 401k. You want to start right away so that you get that compound interest working for you. Okay. Now, one other thing that I really believe on 621, and Susie Orman started this out at the beginning of her tape, or her video that I really enjoyed, and she said it's never too late to start, whether we're talking about retirement, a budget, or whatever it is. All of you are relatively young that are in this class. I will tell you, it's never too late to start. As someone once said, it's never too late to start a good habit. It's never too late to give up a bad habit. It's never too late to say I'm sorry. It's never too late to just, work a little harder and be a little better. But it's never too late to start doing your retirement planning, doing your budgeting, and starting your mutual fund. So I would just say this, as you start to do your retirement planning and think about the direction you're going to go, think about some of the things that you want to do when you retire, whether you want a second home, vacations, things like that. But one thing I've seen in people that retire, is that their expenses do not go down. Okay? Now let's talk about some other sources, potential sources of income. Our two main sources when we retire, again, will be Social Security and the 401k. The book talks on page 622 about taking a second job or working extra hours. I would just say this. This is why it's so important to be out of debt. And this is not an indictment on corporate America. This is just reality 101. I don't think Discover is any different than Cincinnati. And I would just say this. My observation over the years is that corporate America generally is not that interested in older workers. When you get into your 60s or 70s, the face of corporations, they want younger people for the most part. And so by the time you hit your mid to late 60s, early 70s, usually corporate America will encourage you, maybe even make it financially worthwhile for you to retire. So if you're going to take a second job or work extra hours, realize you're probably not going to make a lot of money. It's interesting, the cycle of life, as I call it, is kind of circular. When we were teenagers, we all did this. We started working at minimum wage, and some of us will end up maybe working at minimum wage as we go through the full cycle. My thought is this. If you're out of debt when you retire, then if you want to work, you can do it on your terms. You can work when you want to work, the hours you want to work, and the type of work you would like to do. I can't think of anything worse than when I retired to be $7,500, $125,000 in debt, especially when the working world is generally not looking for older workers at high wages. And so, again, if I work after I retire, I want it to be on my terms. Okay? It talks another potential source of income could be the properties that you may buy. The rental income, that is very realistic. We talked about the upside and the downside of working, of owning property. There are other things that, your investments can pay dividends. That's why we want to continue to invest. But as we talk about retirement, think about that. I think if you're out of debt, if you participate in a 401k, obviously you get Social Security, you should do fine. So when anyone comes along, and there will be throughout your life, trying to convince you on additional retirement plans, don't buy. Just be nice about it. Just say, I'm not interested. Your time and effort is just so much better in working your way out of debt so that when you retire, you're debt-free, as Dave Ramsey preached to us so well several weeks ago. But if we can go that direction, our efforts and everything will be so much better. Now, a couple other things the book talks about, and just want to comment on them briefly because you hear about them. One of the things that you'll see from time to time is someone will try to sell you what's known as a reverse mortgage. I couldn't be more against reverse mortgages. Reverse mortgages generally happen to people when they have a lot of debt when they retire. And so in essence, the bank takes possession of the house. You don't have to make the house payment, but after a while, the bank may own the house and you could be in trouble. Life insurance, if you do have a whole life, we've already talked about that. That's generally not the direction I like to go, but whole life can be considered an investment. Again, if you're going to go into whole life, make sure you're doing that for the long term. And the cash value that's in there, you can borrow against. The expense of whole life is quite a bit. So I would be careful with that. The book talks about some of the expenses that you're going to have. Some expenses are just going to go up. Your clothing expense, your housing expense. If you're out of debt, you're going to have to pay property tax and insurance, but that really shouldn't be that much. Car, gas and insurance, those things go up. But again, if you own your vehicle and you're not making car payments, you should be fine. One of the things that could go up, would be medical expenses. And let me just a couple comments on this. Most of us, I mean all of us in this group, myself and all of you who work for Discover, obviously we get our health insurance through our employer. When you retire, obviously you'll no longer, say you retire from Discover, I retire from Cincinnati, I'll go off that plan, but I'll go into Medicare. Now we'll go into Medicare. Now I've talked to a lot of people that are on Medicare. First of all, Medicare is not free. There are premiums that you have to pay, and a lot of it is based on your retirement income. Medicare does not cover everything. There's copays and deductibles, just like there are in our current insurance. But I will say this, the majority of people that I've talked to and gone to Medicare, it's actually less expensive than what you're paying probably for your health insurance right here at Discover, or I'm paying with Cincinnati Insurance. Now again, the great benefit of being healthy. And I know all of us can probably name people that we've known that lived a healthy lifestyle and had health problems. There's no guarantee, obviously, on our health. But if we live a healthy lifestyle and don't have to go to the doctor so much, that will cut our expenses. But very definitely, let's realize that Medicare is not free. And there are copays and deductibles. There might be some supplemental insurance that we'll want to purchase because Medicare doesn't cover everything. So something to think about. So you'll still be paying for insurance, still be paying for visits to the doctor. The type of housing that you may want, I think some of the choices, if you want to move into a condominium, a mobile home, things like that. Again, the key here is to be out of debt. If you're out of debt, you have so much more flexibility. I'll tell you one thing that it talks about on page 630. It says avoiding retirement housing traps. I already talked about the reverse mortgage. I would just say this. Remember we talked about that we should all have a line of defense, and that is before we make any big financial move. Hopefully we talk to our parents, friends, maybe if we're in the retirement area, we talk about to our kids or someone. But especially if you're looking at changing your housing in retirement, your parents are, your grandparents, make sure they get some good advice. Because again, there's scam artists everywhere. It's just like I've said, where there's roadkill, there's vultures. Where there's money, there's scam artists. It's interesting and this is sad, when you watch American Greed, or the other night we were watching, because of the COVID-19, we're watching a lot more movies and things on TV. But we were watching Unsolved Mysteries. Maybe you've watched that in the past with Robert Stack, and they had one. And again, the pattern's always the same. It seems like they're elderly people and people that they have confidence in, people they know in their neighborhood, where they go to church or go to the club or the golf course. They rely on them, and they don't get a second opinion. But inevitably, they violate the principle of what we've talked about, and that is they think there's going to be a lot of return for little risk. I'm always amazed that people will fall for that trap. Let's remind ourselves, and this is obviously going to be a test question in 2 weeks. The greater the potential return, the greater the risk. It has to be that way. So if anyone ever offers you, I don't care who they are or how reputable they may seem to be, how smooth, how well dressed, how great their presentation, if they're promising you an abnormal return with little or no risk, you need to run the other way and just say you're not interested. But please, before you go into any big investment, get a second opinion or a third opinion and make sure we know what we're doing. Okay? When we do retire, it talks your retirement income on 631. Talked about Social Security. Again, the ideal age is basically around 70 or 71, and that's from Susie Orman. And I certainly agree with that. Now, everyone's different. I have a friend of mine who's had a lot of health problems. He's actually still with us. And he started at 62 just because of some of the challenges he had. So everybody's situation's a little bit different. Social Security benefits are taxed. Of course, if we work after we retire, that can decrease the amount of Social Security that we can take. But those are all a long ways away. Today, at your age, again, I would just work on getting out of debt and try to live as healthy a lifestyle as you possibly can. If you do, you will have a good retirement. Now, on 635, it talks a little bit about employer pension plans. As I said, most of these have gone the way of the world. A defined contribution plan, an employer's pension plan, most of them don't have it. And like I say, I talked to Heather Christensen a year or so ago in this class, and she said, we do not have a defined benefit plan anymore. Ours at Cincinnati went away several years ago too, hence why it's so important to participate in the 401k. There are some other ones that are mentioned. On 638, an IRA, an individual retirement account, has a tax benefit. There's what's known as a Roth IRA. I would highly encourage you to take a look at that. We have invested in our household in a Roth IRA. The Roth IRA, you do not get the tax benefit, but if you leave it in 5 years, you don't have to pay any federal or state income taxes when you take the money out. I think the Roth IRA, I think we've already talked about it, is a great thing to set up. You can put it in various mutual funds, just that when you do it, make sure this is more for your long term. If you want something more short term, put it in a regular mutual fund. But I think the Roth IRA is great. Start taking money out after 5 years or whenever. You don't have to pay any income taxes at all, federal or state. Retirement plans are basically portable. So if you leave Discover, you leave and go to another company, basically they will be there. A Keogh plan on 643. A Keogh plan is kind of like an IRA, but somewhere down the line, if you start your own business, you would set up what's known as a Keogh plan. And it works a lot like a 401k. It will reduce your taxes, and you can start putting some money into that. But a Keogh plan is just if you own your own particular business and that's your main source of income. It says, will you have enough money for when you retire? I would just say this, again, as you get into your 50s and into your 60s, you can, and this is the advantage of budgeting, as my wife and I have looked at our retirement. We've been budgeting for a number of years. We know how much money within reason that we spend each month. As you get out of debt, you can look very well at your retirement, how much you're going to need a month, at your Social Security benefit. Every couple of years, I get a statement for myself and for my wife on what our Social Security benefit will be. And then you can look at your 401k, see how much money you have in that, and think about when you retire taking some money out. But I promise you that if you'll do those things, you'll do just fine. It does talk again a little bit about working, some of the other things. Again, if we're out of debt and we have our health, then it'll be on our terms at our option. So let's kind of review where we're at and where we're going. First of all, your 5-point assignment that you need to send to me. So you get the 5 points credit for this week, and that is when you retire, where are you going to get money from? We already obviously talked. Two most important sources would be the Social Security and the 401k. So list a few of those. Next week, we're going to finish up and talk about estate planning. And that's basically what you do as you prepare for the day when we're no longer around with your family. We'll also talk about the Susie Orman video that hopefully most of you have watched. I'll give you the highlights on that because you'll be responsible for those on that second test. So your 5-point assignment is sources of income when you retire. We're still working, and I still need, obviously, term paper, book reports. Some have turned those in. 3 articles, I didn't mention that. Most have turned that in. Your investment assignment, 10 stocks you're following for 5 weeks. And your budget. That's your individual budget for the months of February, March, and April. And then, of course, the week of May the 4th, I believe it is, that first week in May, we will have the second exam. And I will give you more information on that in next week's lecture. I hope everyone's doing good. You know where I'm at. Email, text, telephone calls. I've gotten all of them. Again, I sent an email to everyone who is lacking some assignments. Please get those in so you can get the full credits. I know 5 points for these individual assignments doesn't sound like a lot, but they do add up, and they do lay the foundation for what you'll have in the test. I wish everyone well, and we'll look forward as we roll toward the end of the semester, and everyone have a pleasant day and continue to stay safe. Do what we've been asked to do by both the local authorities and obviously the people where you work there at Discover. To all of you, my best. Thank you.